Greetings, YouTube. The Doctor is in. Dr. Urias Papers here, coming at you with another commentary on Dungeons and Dragons. And today we are going to talk about the spell Flame Strike, particularly the 2024 version of Flame Strike. Right now I've got the Legacy version up. We're going to talk about the changes that have been made between the Legacy version and the 2024 version. We're also going to look at some classes that can use Flame Strike. In addition, we're going to take a review of this spell from first to second to third. We're going to skip over fourth, and then we're going to start with fifth, of course. But first, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you have any questions or comments, please leave a question or a comment. And don't forget to hit that notification bell. All right, let's get into it. Back in the day, I gave Flame Strike a big, giant D. This was a terrible spell, but it was one of the few that was usable by clerics that were not light domain clerics. So it was a damage dealing spell that they had, which was better than most of the alternatives that they had at like lower levels. So it was a 5th level spell, which is a very high level spell. Took one action to cast. It had a range of 60 feet. It only had a 10-foot radius. I had a problem with that. It was a 40-foot high cylinder, so you could hit things that were flying. Verbal somatic material component, it was instantaneous, and it did 4d6 fire and 4d6 radiant damage on a failed save, half as much on a successful one. And if you upcast it, you got an extra d6 for every slot above 5th level, meaning that you could get up to another 4d6 damage on top of this, making it 12d6. Now, the issue I had with this was that comparable to Fireball, and Fireball really hasn't changed. Comparable to Fireball, this spell is essentially the same. Fireball had a longer range, it had more of a radius of effect, and it did just as much damage as a 3rd level spell. So that was one of the big reasons why I gave this a pretty bad score. So let's take a look at the 2024 version now. So still a 5th level spell, still one action, still 60-foot range, still a 10-foot radius. I wish they would change that. Verbal somatic material components, evocation, all that stuff really hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed with this spell is that it does 5d6 fire and 5d6 radiant on a failed save and half as much on a successful save. And now you can still upcast it for a d6. It's still usable by clerics, light domain clerics, and Oath of Devotion paladins. Look like the Genie Warlock can also cast this, and the Circle of Wildfire Druids can also cast this. So essentially what they did is they recognized that this was not the equivalent of Fireball, and then there were some classes that could cast Fireball and Flame Strike at this, they could have these two prepared at the same time. And why would you prepare this one when you could prepare Fireball and it would do equivalent damage at a longer range with a greater radius? So now this does 10d6, which is essentially the same as a Fireball cast at 5th level. And now they're equivalent. So the big differences between this and Fireball now are it does radiant damage instead of just fire damage. So you could do damage to things that would be immune to fire versus not immune to fire, or things that are vulnerable to radiant. So you have that extra damage type that is in there instead of just plain fire. So what would I give this now that they've made this change? I'm going to move this up to like a B-. It's very situational. I would still prefer to cast Fireball because of the range and the radius on it. But again, it's still usable by the same classes too. So let's take a look at one of those classes. I'm only going to look at one, and that's the Light Domain Cleric. The Light Domain Cleric does get Fireball, and they get Flame Strike. So at 5th level, they can add Fireball to their list. You see it there. It says Light Domain spells. Your connection to the Divine Domain ensures you always have certain spells ready. When you reach a cleric level specified in the Light Domain, you thereafter always have the listed spells prepared. So you always have Fireball, and you always have Flame Strike, and then you can use your slots to basically cast Fireball as much as you want, or Flame Strike if you need to. Say there's a flying creature, or something is immune or resistant to fire, or something's vulnerable to radiant, then you could cast Flame Strike instead. But you're going to have less 5th level slots than you are with Fireball. So you have to think about whether you're going to cast that Fireball in that 5th level slot, or you're going to cast Flame Strike in that 5th level slot. And again, that is very situational. Okay, I am going to look over at the other screen now because I've got this up here. But here is Flame Strike from the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook. And it was a 5th level spell then. So this spell goes all the way back to OG D&D. All the way back. So 5th level spell, it had a range of 6 inches, which essentially is 60 feet. So they did everything in inches back then. Duration of 1 segment. Casting time was 8 segments. So if you got caught, you could have this spell taken away. Area of effect was a 1-inch diameter by 3-inch high column. So essentially you could hit like one figure. So it didn't have that much of a diameter. When the cleric calls down a flame strike spell, a column of fire roars downward in the exact location called for by the caster if any creature is within the area of effect, which was pretty much just one creature. Failure. You make a saving throw. Failure to make the save means the creature has sustained 68 damage. That's 6d8 damage. And Gary Gygax liked to write these things out too, so it was 6 to 48. Or 3d8 points of damage on a pass saving throw. It says otherwise. And he wrote out 3 to 24. And then the material component was a pinch of dust. So this was the base spell for all the other spells to be written upon. Here is the 2nd level version of this. So again, it's range of 60 yards now, so we're getting away from those inches. Area of effect is a 5-foot radius, not a 10-foot radius, but so now we're getting, that's like 4 10-foot square, or 5-foot squares. So now we're getting a little bit bigger, 30-foot high column. Still had a casting time of 8 segments. And so you evoke Flame Strike, a vertical column of flame comes down. Any creature in the area must roll a saving throw versus spell, so they had different saving throws back then. And then failure means the creature sustains 68 points of damage. Otherwise, the damage is halved. So, and there wasn't really any, like, there were creatures that were immune to fire, or there were creatures that were resistant to fire, but these, back then, they didn't really say whether they were, that was fire damage, or it was basically just damage. And then here is the 3rd edition one. So the 3rd edition, we brought in some new mechanics, like we brought in the damage types. They were no longer saves versus spells, or saves versus poison, or any of that stuff. It was now like a reflex save. And so it was a 5th level cleric spell, 4th level druid spell. So before, this one was a cleric spell, and the 1st edition, or Advanced Dungeons & Dragons version, was a cleric spell. Now we're adding in clerics, druids, sun domain, and war domain clerics as well. And it was one standard action at a range of 100 plus 10 foot per level. So these spells had very long ranges in 3rd edition. It's a 10-foot radius, 40-foot high. So now this is where we get the 10-foot radius from in 5th edition. It comes from 3rd edition, not necessarily from Advanced Dungeons & Dragons or 2nd edition. And it was a reflex for half, so we brought this mechanic in. Flame Strike produces a vertical column of divine fire roaring downward. The spell deals 1d6 points of damage per caster level, maximum 15d6. So it's a 5th level spell. You cast it. And this was a mechanic of 3rd edition that I really liked that did not pass over into 5th edition. they kind of capped spells. They did static, 5th edition has spells do static amounts of damage unless you upcast them. 3rd edition was the spell remained static itself. The power that got added into it was more powerful as the caster got powerful. So if you were a 15th level cleric, you were doing 15d6 damage with this particular spell. Half the damage is fire, but the other half results directly from divine power and is therefore not subject to being reduced by resistance to fire-based attacks such as that granted by protection from fire, fire shield, chill shield, and similar magic. So there wasn't radiant damage per se then, but there was fire damage, and they called it out. And if you were resistant to fire or immune to fire, you'd still take half damage. So if it was like a fire giant that was immune to fire, half of the damage from this up to 15d6 damage would have been not fire, and it would have taken that full amount. I do like that particular mechanic from 3rd edition. I wish that had carried over. It makes sense to me that if you are a powerful caster, your spells will be more powerful. But I guess in 5th edition, you can use slots at higher levels because you are a more powerful caster. But these were just automatic kind of freebies. So, all in all, that is the video that I have for everybody today. That is what we're talking about, Flame Strike. I hope everybody enjoyed, and I will catch everybody